So I recently got a friend into Wreckfest. There's only one problem though. He is, well, terrible, and not because of much fault on his own part. He knows how to drive and he understands how the game works in that regard, he just can't put it to good use. Now it's easy for me to tell him what he has to do, and of course he tries, but consistent little mistakes and corrections always will lose time. Maybe only 10 or 20 milliseconds, but they add up to seconds quickly. So I figured I would cover the absolute basics of driving in Wreckfest. But this is no easy task, of course, because it is a very vast subject, and this is obviously a long video, you've seen the timer. We'll see what I can do. Before we start though, remember this channel is not based on dirty driving, nor is it based on clean racing. So what I will try to teach today may not be the best choices for a dirty server, and may not be as fast as a clean server requires in order to stay competitive. Clean servers are far harder to stay fast in. This video will also be fairly useless for anyone who has a good amount of experience in the game and uses a controller, which is quite a large majority of people as far as I'm aware. You may get some knowledge from it or just confirm what you already do. Whatever. If you don't use a controller, you may find some use here, especially if you want to start getting into one. Well, that being said, let's start. The very first thing I would recommend is learning how to use gears, even if it's just manual without clutch. If you want to be fast in any racing game, it is crucial that you know how to shift competently. You can change gears with any of the shifting settings, automatic, manual, clutch with manual, obviously. The shifting controls are either LB and L1 or RB and R1. I have them set to square and X on my controller, which is X and A respectively on an Xbox controller. Quick aside, I use a 8-bit Do SN30 Pro Plus controller, which is either a PlayStation controller or a Xbox controller. It is a Nintendo thing, I think. The controller to change gear is actually Y and B, but they're in the same place as X and square, sorry. I'm just more used to this method of shifting. My thumb rests over both the shifting keys, so I can change gear effectively without having to get used to a different grip on the controller. I won't cover clutch today. In short, just tap the clutch at the same time that you change gear. You don't have to decelerate either. It's much faster in Wreckfest. Assuming you don't already use manual gearing, try to listen to your engine's RPM and when it shifts, how loud your engine is after it's shifted. This is roughly the end of your car's power band, where your car will accelerate more efficiently. And listen for when you shift up, what the engine sounds like after the fact. That's your bottom end of the power band. They have different uses. You want to shift early into a downhill, etc, etc. While turning with automatic gears, you may hear the engine's RPM drop massively, and then or shift down twice or 3 times depending on the car. And then you'll be back in the power band. This is a very good place to start learning how to use gears. It is significantly more efficient for your car to shift down midway through the corner, holding RPM, and then potentially down again if it's needed, but your engine's RPM being higher will result in faster turning speed, and you'll actually have more control, I find, through the corner. Watch what I mean. Starting from as near as I can make identical positions on the track, I'm going to take this corner and the next 2 corners, stopping the timer coming out onto the straight. We'll take note of our speed, and we'll also take note of the time it takes for us to do this. Using automatic gears, it took me 16.03 seconds to get through this section of the track, and when I stopped the timer I was doing 82 miles an hour. However, when I shifted myself, still using automatic gearing, I got through in 15.94, despite actually taking a worse line through the first corner, which lost me a good quarter of a second. My speed was also 84 miles an hour, which is 2 miles an hour quicker already. This could be partly down to the line I took being wider, so I had more actual room to accelerate with, but it was probably more down to me shifting into third, going up that hill, so I wasn't maxed out, which meant that I was faster at the top of the hill, which gave me more speed because that section of the track is now downhill. This is undoubtedly the first thing that you should practice if you don't use manual gears yet, shifting with automatic gears. Sometimes it will disagree with you on when to shift. If it does, this means one of two things. Either you are shifting wrongly, probably too early, or you need to turn off automatic and focus on using manual. Don't look at your revs to know when to change gear, pretty much ever, unless you know for a certainty that it won't cause issues for you. You should be able to do it by sound alone. Here's a little clip of me driving fairly quickly with no HUD at all. This is also in a car that I am unfamiliar with. Holding 5th right now, 6th. I just can't get past these ride-ins. I didn't tune the car before joining the race. A little bit rough, it's fine. He's not going to react nicely, is he? I wouldn't recommend that you turn your HUD off, it's horrible. Who would have guessed? Okay, so now we've covered gears, we'll go into line choice. Hands down, the most important thing in Wreckfest is line choice. Line choice is always situational, and it's quite rare that you'll take a corner identically twice because of minute differences in braking points or players around you forcing you to change your line in accordance with them. So, because of that, I can't really tell you the exact way to take a corner. At that, something like the Vandal handles very differently to, say, the Killer Bee that I was just driving, and how you take your turns will differ accordingly based on the car. Something I like to say is always take a corner outside, inside, outside. However, this isn't even true for every corner in the game. There's a lot of turns that aren't possible to take perfectly from the outside, or that are just simply slower to do so, and without knowing every corner perfectly, you simply won't know how to take those corners. But there is a few things you can do to counter that. Let me show you what I mean. So I downloaded a modded track. I've never played this track before, but watch how I drive it. I won't break down the first lap. I'm only going to show you 3 of the 4 laps I did, even though I get a PB on every single one of them. But I'll break down the 2nd and 3rd lap, just so you have an idea for what I'm doing. So you'll have noticed that, well, that first lap was pretty dreadful in terms of driving. It was okay, I was keeping to the outside where I could. There was a couple of corners which I saw I could cut sort of down the middle of, and will improve in that first lap significantly. This first corner, though, is a difficult one to judge, because I'm coming into it doing so much more speed. I don't know when I need to turn, and it's also quite a difficult corner. It gets tighter towards the end of the turn, which I noticed is quite common on this track. Well, that was kind of crappy of me. I'm going to take that corner much better on the next laps. I know roughly where I need to brake now because I've came into it with speed. Generally the second lap is not a very good lap either, but this is okay. I'm not going to show you the third lap, instead I'm going to skip to the fourth lap. We'll go through this lap for now. So, these corners that get tighter as you go around are actually the weakest corners for me. I really struggle with them because there's no sort of predefined apex of the corner. But we did it okay, we didn't get quite as tight as we could have done. We'll make better on that next lap, and the lap after that. This corner as well, we cut slightly, that's fine. We're still keeping outside, inside, outside, and our position in the track now is very well set up for the next corner. We don't have to make any more adjustments. Pay close attention to my controller and how I don't pretty much ever steer directly 90 degrees left and right. Sometimes I do, but generally I don't. I'll move the thumbstick to the kind of 7 to 8 o'clock positions and 1 and 2 o'clock positions for the right hand side. The reason that this is the case is the reason I move it up to the top right and the bottom left is just because of sort of where your thumb sits on the controller. It is different for a Xbox controller because you've got your thumb further up. That's why I prefer these controllers though, they give you more precise steering. The reason that I do this actual steering though is to give me more control over the car. If I move the thumbstick directly upwards, I will input something onto the steering. It'll be insignificant, but it will make some form of turn. It's the same for how I steer here. This will give me far greater control in the way the car's handling, and it'll allow me to make less sharp turns on less sharp corners. Okay, we're going to skip to the last lap. You've seen how I took the second lap reasonably quickly. It was okay. I set a 150. And you'll see how that compares to the fourth lap where I set a 148. I'll break it down, of course. Since I've just spoken a little bit about gearing, I figure I might as well talk about it some more. Notice how I shift down in a second, just as I'm getting to the top of the hill. This is a place where automatic gears with this car and this tuning wouldn't shift for me, and I would lose time because of that. This reinforces the fact that it is absolutely worth learning manual gears. Even if I just shift up a little bit later, it helps a lot. This corner here is a very good example of a corner that you don't want to come in from the outside of. The turn coming up in next is very wide on the exit, which means if I cut straight across and come in on the inside of the corner, I've still got that room on the outside of the corner, which means that I'll cut off some time where I'm turning, and I'll generally make my line a bit more flowy through this corner. I don't in this clip, but it's whatever. I can't go back and unchange mistakes I made. These last three corners, they can be flowed very nicely. However, at the time I couldn't really figure out how I should have done it. Watching the clip back, it's sort of obvious. What I want to be doing is coming in from the far right hand side of the turn, and then I'll pause again and show you where I want to be hitting the absolute inside of the corner to make the exit of this corner a straight line into the entrance of the next corner, which will give me a good chance to build up some speed for the last turn, which is a very slow left-hand corner into the straight, which is it's still a turn, it's a right-hand, very loose turn. Instead, what I do is I handbrake turn to get the car pointing in the direction I wanted it to be pointing in, which does lose me a little bit of time, but if I didn't do this, then I would have come off the track in a few seconds. This is where I needed to be on the inside of the corner. I'm actually pointing in the roughly right direction. I need to be a little bit tighter in on the track though, and that's simply not possible without steering more or taking a different line into the corner. And so, because I didn't come in wide enough here, I have to flick the car around here not to lose time, and I come off the track here. This really speaks into how you need to predict what you're going to be doing in the next corner. You might be thinking right about now, what the fuck are you going on about? You steered off the track right there where you said you came off the track. Yes, I did. And let me show you why. Here's a clip of me taking that corner in the same car with the same tuning the correct way. Notice how much wider we are on this corner, and how we come in at the apex of the turn where it's tightest, and how it makes these next 2 turns so much smoother, even though I shift badly for them. Coming off the track to maintain a flowier line is something you shouldn't really worry about doing. Generally it won't cause a problem for you, although remember, the grass is usually far less grippy than the driving surface, be it dirt, tarmac, gravel, sand or snow. Because of this I like to, well, if I have to come off the track, do it in such a way that rejoining is in the direction of travel, which is just a fancy way of saying the inside of a corner. Remember, of course, depending on the server you're in, players may not be willing to let you back onto the track. It also may be against the rules. So for cornering, another thing you should remember, I've covered it a little bit, is that you can move the steering at a less steep angle, so up and down a bit as well, to get less severe steering. I also flick the stick a lot. Here I've got a brighter control layout so you can see more easily what I'm doing. I prefer not to use this one though because it's kind of hard to see the triggers. Watch how I manipulate the controller by turning it at different angles and flicking the stick to keep in line and take a lot more control over my car and its direction. You can think of the controller like a steering wheel in a way. By pushing the stick forwards and slightly left or right, you input a very small degree of steering, similar to moving the controller slightly left, but not all the way, which I find very hard to do accurately, especially while under the pressure of a race. The sensitivity of this will also vary, depending on your advanced control settings. You can see mine now. I've been told that they aren't very good though, and that my control settings are far too sensitive. They work for me, they may not work for you. So far we've covered some pretty broad topics. At that, they don't necessarily apply to many of the situations that you'll actually find yourself in while driving. Well, that's not exactly true, but how many times have you played and ended up in a situation where you haven't got to drive with another car? Especially in online. Unless you're an exceptional player, it's going to be pretty much every race, if not every single race. So let's cover some of how to react around other players and how to adapt your line choice around them to put yourself at the best advantage. The blue Venom to our front didn't seem to like that red Hammerhead's overtake much at all. I know this because he turned into him all the way through that first corner. He might try something on him, but I don't know that for sure at this point in time. We will get some extra space to move into our front if he does though, so let's hope for it. The Super Venom to our front left is going a little bit faster than us, so he may be able to take that extra space if it appears, and we don't want that to happen. Being in a much heavier car, we can use our weight to keep hold of that position, if he doesn't get ahead quickly. This player's fast, and the Super Venom likewise. There isn't much more to know about what's going to happen here though, there simply isn't enough information to judge on. It's hard for you to see because my controller overlay is in the way, but the Raven to my right is probably going to try to cut inside of the Killer Bee in front of him, which may block the gap created by the Venom if he decides to try and go for the Hammerhead. Basing things on hopes like this is risky at times because sometimes it may just not play out, but again, it comes down to hope, and if not, we're going to be going quicker, we can just force our way through the Venoms. Well, that didn't really go too well for us. We're stuck on the outside of this corner now because we got pushed out by, well, literally all of the other cars on the track. There isn't really much that we can do in that situation about it. Potentially, if I had the foresight to, I could have braked slightly and cut behind the Speedbird. I don't really think it would have put me in much better, if any better, of a situation because of the Super Venom behind me. And at that, there wasn't really room to. All the cars closed in very tightly, and to be fair, being stuck on the outside is somewhat better in this situation. It gives me room to judge what's happening, and this little ditch, people like to try and avoid being in, which means I'm probably going to have this section of the track all to myself, so I can pick and choose when to drop back into the race. It is worth noting that we are about 4 or 5 cars wide on this straight. There is me, this Speedbird, a TriStar, a Super Venom, a Stella, and there's a car to his right as well. There is a lot of cars on the line, so it is actually probably more likely than getting into that gap that we're going to be pushed further left, more so than we can do anything to control, but that's fine because we're going a little bit quicker than this Speedbird in front of us, and we're on his outside, so we can lean on him if we get pushed up the hill to our left. So we had ourselves a little look back there. It was enough time for me to get all of the information I needed. If it wasn't enough time for you to get all the information you needed, then we'll drop back a couple frames and have a look at it. Okay, so what is there that we can see? Well, I can see a grand total of 5 cars that are noteworthy. There is 3 Venoms, a Stella, and a car that I can't make out the model of. The Super Venom very close to me is my biggest threat at the moment. I also know who they are. They're a very fast player, so I want to position myself such that I will be in the way, or at least as much in the way as possible, to stop him from trying to overtake me. That means that I'm going to try and position myself quite central in the track, and as he appears when I'm looking forwards in my sort of corner of my vision, I'll be able to act based on that. Chances are he's going to try and cut inside. There isn't going to be much that I can do for that if he does. That unknown car may have caused the crash with the Super Venom far behind me. I don't know that for certain. I'll assume that he did though. This is just a safer bet. I'll know more depending on what happens between him and that other Super Venom he's next to. Note that I'm a moderator here in Black Flag 2. I wouldn't kick off of me just assuming something. I prefer to actually see said player breaking the rules before acting on it, or having a clip, which I can then act off of. There is a whole ton of information to break down here. First off, we're in 5th. That's a very good position to be in. I'm comfortable with staying here for the rest of the race. Second off, I don't really know what's happened behind me, but Natty is now in 17th, so they had a crash. That means that they are not going to be as much of a threat anymore until sort of lap 3 or 4 if they make their way back up. The player far behind me, who I couldn't tell the car of, I think is probably Banana Tiger. He was a moderator here, so chances are he didn't cause that crash. I don't know for certain. Again, I didn't see. I can't say anything on that. BT, I know, was driving the white Super Venom that we saw earlier next to who I think is Banana Tiger. I know that because we spotted him while we were 5 wide, so we know what car he was driving. We can also check that by holding the options button on our controller, and that will bring up an extended view of all the cars and all of their lap times. Aside from that, there isn't really much more information to know. The player in first is far ahead in first, nearly a 0.3 of a second further in front than the next player behind him, who, from what I can see, appears to be driving a Bullet. That shouldn't be too much of a problem to fight. Interesting discovery for sure. The player in front of us in this rocket is driving a 161 class rocket. So he's not driving a maxed out rocket. I also noticed a little bit earlier ago, when I could see better into the back window of his car, he has a full roll cage. So it looks like he's pretty new to the game, as he's not taken off any of his armour yet. He may not be, this is all just guesswork. He's also got one of the first customization options you can get for actually modifying the looks of that car. I'm fairly sure he's a new player, but he's a good driver. We've got to make a distinction there. He's keeping up with these cars in front. That Bullet and Hammerhead far ahead, or not far ahead, but ahead of us, are very aggressive drivers. The Hammerhead RS to our far front, he's really quite good at defending, so he's probably going to be an issue to overtake, and this Bullet seems to be a bit quicker than I expected initially. That was about as rough of an overtake as I could justify against that rocket. We can see for sure that he does have a full roll cage, so his car is going to be heavier, but we pushed through him without any worries at all. He may not be very happy with us doing this though, so we'll have to keep an eye on him. Just make sure he doesn't become a problem. So this is a really shitty situation to be in. This is what I refer to as being locked with another player. Essentially all this is where the player in front of me is turning left, and I am also turning left. My car is against the corner of the steering in my car is against not against the rear wheels of his car, they're actually a bit further back. It's a very specific area, and it is a really crappy situation to get into when this happens. But the only way to get out of it is for me to turn right. Now, we're coming up to a right-hand turn, which we have to turn left for now. That's why we're both turning left. There is no way out of this crash. I'm not going to turn right to crash into this wall in front of us. He's not going to turn right to spin me over him, although if he did, it would force me to brake, and I would brake. So potentially he could get out of it that way. There is no real good way out of this, though. The way he could have avoided it initially was by giving me more room on the inside of the corner, on the outside of the corner earlier, but realistically he can't do that. Given the amount of time that we had before this lock started happening, it was unavoidable. Okay, we have second place now. We've seen how aggressive this player has been with the other two players who have tried to pass him. Let's assert ourselves as clearly as possible and as early as possible. We know he's a good player, so I expect he can take a little bit of a love tap. Well, my little bump with him, I think, may have had some unintended consequences. Look how far inside the corner he is. That is anything but a racing line. He probably intends on using me to get around the corner. If I can judge it right, I can hit the wall with his corner on my front, which will probably cause him to crash. Let's see what I can do. Yeah, that didn't play out well at all. My car turns far worse than his, so that could have been sort of expected to have happened. Oh no, not again. Well, this time at least we're somewhat justified in braking a bit, so we can hopefully brake past him and we won't get locked and crash out again. That guy's probably super fucking mad at us now. That's the second time we've locked with him. We've hardly been kind since before we locked up. So I think I'm gonna back off if I get into another fight with him. I don't want him to break the rules in rage. Now, you may be wondering, why have I paused here? I'll give you a minute. Take a look around. What is a reason that I could have paused? I'm top 3, and I can see the other 2 players in front of me. But there's another dot on that minimap. He's been banned, just so you know. Well, I probably shouldn't have won that. It looks like that red hammerhead probably wanted to give that position back to the guy who got hit by the oncoming car. Oh well. People often say these breakdowns are good and useful. While I agree, giving you 20 seconds to spot someone on the minimap that will affect the race critically is not easy. You've got all of a second at most. A second's a long time in racing, but we unfortunately have a limitation, being the speed of light. Your ability to see a piece of information like that, a car going backwards, formulate a solution, then actually do that, can take up to half a second. And to be honest, it's simply not possible to react in a calculated way anything under 250 milliseconds. So what can we do to make this a bit easier for us? Where to start? Well, I would be able to set a relatively good lap time with only 15 frames per second. That's only down to track knowledge and knowledge of how cars drive in Wreckfest, specifically that is. But a consistent 45 to 60 frames that doesn't drop or stutter is very helpful. That way you won't be thinking about the fact that you're lagging, which will take away, albeit a small amount of your attention on the game, which will affect your ability to drive well. The next thing I would worry about is simply learning the tracks. It is hard, it will take you a decent amount of time, at least 100 hours of solid driving just to learn the tracks to a even basic degree. So I would start by just completing the career, or just getting the Venom, which is the last reward car in the game. That way you'll have a new car, which is actually my favourite car in the game. It's very good. That was awesome. But you'll also get experience in the game, which is the most important thing. Now, it won't be perfect. None of the new tracks are in the career mode, but the vast majority of the tracks that you'll play, you'll have at least some experience in. And you'll also have some experience in how the cars drive. And you'll also probably find your least favourite track or tracks. I would probably focus on practicing those. Going to a custom event, in my case I really hate Fire Rock Raceway. I still hate it. But I've practiced it in custom events and I'm at least competitive on Fire Rock because of that. Aside from that, there isn't really much more to say. Once you've found a car that you're comfortable with, stick to it for a while, and let your skills develop with that car. Being confident in one car specifically is always a good thing to have, because you can just go back to it. If you've got any questions at all, put them in the comments. I make a fairly decent effort to reply to comments, if of course it's needed. All that having been said, thank you for watching the basics of driving in Wreckfest.